Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I have a new Florida friend with us today, Angela Duncan. Welcome, Angela.
Hi, so great to be here today.
Yes, I'm so excited for this conversation because you have an expertise that I literally don't know anything about. We're going to talk about a very important topic that I know you're going to make sound super duper interesting and fun and easy for us to understand. That is the world of insurance. So, do you promise to make it fun and easy and exciting for us, Angela?
I will do my best not to bore you with insurance details.
I know when you see Angela, it's like I feel like you'd be doing something other than this. You just look so like exciting and fun and fresh, and you are. And then it's like, and I do insurance, and I'm like, oh my gosh, then it must be super cool because you are super cool. So let's dive in, Angela. You have a really awesome background, a very interesting background. I mean, you have been a stockbroker. You have built a real estate business. I believe you had one of the largest remaxes in the state of Florida. You've done insurance, like you've done a lot of very interesting things. You have such an eclectic background. So can you walk us through that journey and what you've learned from each one of those types of positions that you've had in those different industries and how it has all culminated into what you do today?
Yeah, so I'll back up into my childhood first. I grew up in poverty and I've always been a very curious person. So I would ask my mom, why aren't we on vacation? Why are we living in a motel room? Why can't I go to school today? And the same question would come up and she would say, because we don't have money. And so from an early age as a kid, I'm like, what is money? Why don't we have it? And how do I get it when I'm older? So I really wanted to go on this pursuit about learning about money because I obviously didn't learn it from my childhood. So when I was 18, moved out of the house, enrolled in community college, got 3 jobs to pay rent and go to school at the same time. And I started to learn about money. Well, fast forward to my first career, I thought, I want to help people to make money. I never want another child to have to live the lifestyle that I did because we didn't have this thing called money. I want to teach other people how to have this tool. So all of my careers kind of have the same underlying thing as I want to teach people about their own money. So stockbroker was first, I attribute that to a movie, early 2000s, the fancy lifestyle, teaching people how to invest in money and have cars and vacations, all the things I wanted as a kid. But I learned that I just don't have the stomach to lose money for people. So I had to kind of transition out of being a stockbroker. And the next thing I got into was real estate. Well, 2007 here in Florida was not the best time to get into real estate. The stock market crashed while I was in that world. Then the real estate housing market crashed when I became a real estate agent. But I learned how to really work with investors. So going back to the money thing, I was great at analyzing spreadsheets, going out and figuring out what this property is going to rent for, what's the rehab going to look like, and just presenting the numbers to investors. I'm not a very emotional person, so I like facts. I want to show you on paper what I think is going to happen with your money. So again, just coming back to that same reoccurring theme of how do I teach people about money? Even when we had that large real estate brokerage, I would sit down with real estate agents because they would run out of money, right? Because they didn't know how to budget on a commission type income. So I would teach them how to look at their income, their expenses, and tuck away money for retirement. So it's just this reoccurring theme about money. And I got a little bored with the real estate side, as a lot of entrepreneurs do. We kind of chase shiny objects. And I wanted to add a business to our existing world, and insurance just seemed to make sense. How do I teach homeowners about insurance? How do I help them protect their home, their car, making sure they know what an umbrella is, and just coming from the education piece? For me, that was so important because I didn't have that background. I wanted to make sure that people really understood not only real estate, but retirement, investing, insurance. That's the whole like foundation of your generational wealth. So that's where that all kind of ties in together.
Yeah, I love how, I mean, as a child, this was kind of already brewing in you, which is so fascinating. So, as I was listening to you share, I think the majority of us didn't grow up with a silver spoon in our mouths, right? My dad was blue collar. He climbed poles for a living, worked for the power and light company. My mom was a teacher her entire career. My dad worked at the same company 48 years. My mom worked in the same career for 34 years. And I heard, again, I think a lot of us heard growing up, especially in our generation, buy what you need, not what you want. The answer oftentimes was, we don't have money for that. We can't afford that. And as children, oftentimes, I mean, I remember comparing myself to other people who I thought were wealthier, had more than I did. And it's like, ooh, I want that too. I'm just curious from like a money mindset perspective. You probably see this too with a lot of adults, and I certainly see it in the coaching space where we become adults and we carry a lot of the trauma and drama from our childhood into the business world. And then we have a hard time charging higher prices or asking for money or closing sales or building a bigger business that brings in more money. I'm just curious, like, how did you navigate the money mindset, knowing how you grew up and knowing what you heard about money? You're an adult now and you've done really well financially for yourself. You've had a lot of business. I think you told me before that you've even you've sold businesses before. So how did you redevelop a healthy money mindset?
For me, it's choosing careers or businesses that work with my personality. So you mentioned, women, we oftentimes have trouble charging enough or putting a price on what our time and our services. So if you think about my first career as a stockbroker, who's setting the prices and the commissions? It's not really myself, right? So at the time I was with Bank of America, if you were bringing money to my group, we had a set fee. I didn't have to tell you why, that fee I chose because someone else said it for me and it was kind of like a standard fee in the industry. So I didn't have to sell the fee part of it. It was more just a service, right? And then going into real estate back then, I know things have changed a little bit as of recently, but I would go into the MLS system, which for a real estate agent is where we go and see all the properties for sale. And if I went under contract and one of my clients bought a property, well, what I was going to be paid as a commission was already in the system. So I didn't have to go to that seller or to that buyer and say, hey, here's my fee and here's why. I never had to explain it because it was already there. And then same thing in the insurance world. When I'm helping people with their business insurance and I'm providing them with the different options and teaching them about insurance, that client is not paying my fee. The insurance carrier is paying my fee. They've already set it. So it's interesting because I never really thought about that is in all the fields that I chose, it's where I don't have to come, what am I charging for my service and how do I sell myself or teach my clients why that's my value? All of those values were already preset for me. And it's just a matter of me coming in and saying, hey, this is what either you pay or, someone else is paying, but I never had to negotiate that information. It was more about how do I help my clients and not what am I making at the end of the day. So very interesting perspective. I never really thought about it in that way.
Yeah, that is really interesting, especially what you said at the beginning of your response that you've chosen to go in directions that are very much in alignment with your personality. And, you also mentioned like, I'm liking you like more and more because you also said that you're not a very emotional person. I'm not a very emotional person. I also like facts. And sometimes when you're not an emotional person, although you smile more than I smile, but you can come across as like, as a woman, not nice or stuck up. I mean, all growing up, like stuck up, thinks you're better than everybody else. Or sometimes when you're like that, people think you're not as smart. It's interesting. But what I'm hearing from you is the way you grew up around money, but then also your personality of not being very emotional. You've chosen careers where that's okay and that's acceptable that you're not an emotional female, because it tends to be more of a masculine trait to be less emotional. I don't know have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, especially when I was in the real estate field, I was married at the time. And I can remember a very specific instance that I was negotiating a contract on a commercial building. And the agent on the other side who represented the seller was a man. And so I'm working through, I'm like, here's the comps. This is why the price is where it is. This is what our offer is. This is what, the terms are. And he mentioned, well, is your husband going to get involved in this negotiation? And it took me back for a second. I had to, think about that. I was so taken back by that because it was me and him negotiating. And I thought, well, why would you say that? But in my mind, I'm not going to say that out loud, obviously, but I thought, well, how do I come across maybe a little different to where he takes me seriously? But I've kind of had to deal with that in all of my careers that I've chosen is the money world is very male dominated. So I've had to learn how to communicate differently so that I have to be a little bit softer. Otherwise, they tend to question me when I am more in that masculine identity, which is more natural for me, but they don't necessarily expect that. They expect more of the feminine side. So I've learned how to adjust it and be a little bit softer in some of my negotiations because that's just the expectation. And it's difficult, but when you know who you're speaking to and how to approach it differently, then I think you can kind of switch that on and off as needed, but it is more difficult for me definitely to be the emotional female that they feel like is supposed to come to the table.
Mm, yeah, that's what they're expecting when they see you coming. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So in all the roles, like stockbroker, real estate, and now insurance, and maybe talk more specifically about your now role, do you also create your own personal brand? And if so, how do you approach creating your brand? Because, you and I are connected on social media. And when I see you, I really do have this perception of you, like you do have your own personal brand. So, how do you approach building your own personal brand, even if you're representing like a bigger umbrella company?
Yeah. And I had a coach teach me this one time. When people are wanting to do business with you, they want to do business with someone who appears. Social media, we can, put whatever personality out there that we want. But what the version of me or the side of me that I show is here's how I'm helping clients. Here are the fun things that I get to do when I help my clients. And here's why I'm an expert in that field. And I really try to stay in those three lanes because I want people to trust me. I want them to see that I'm doing what I'm telling them that I do. So my current, company, I do commercial insurance, which means I help business owners with their own insurance. And a lot of times people don't understand exactly what that means or why I'm an expert in that field. So I show a lot of me speaking like we're speaking right now about different facts within the insurance world, and I tend to keep it a little bit shorter because I know that insurance to most people is very boring. I find it fascinating, but if I can just give you one fact to pique your interest and then you comment and you say, what is that? I didn't know about that. Then at least my brand out there, you've already kind of trusted me because I'm putting out that information, but now you're feeling, vulnerable enough to ask a question, whether it's publicly or via DMs. But I definitely feel like your personal brand is super important because that's how people start to trust you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So this is a really good segue into the conversation around insurance. So what what's the exact type of insurance you sell today and to whom do you sell it to? And let's start getting into why insurance, like why as business owners should we even be paying attention to insurance?
Yeah. So, number one thing is when you're deciding to get into business, whether you're working from home to starting your business, you have to have a liability policy. That's the first step because we live in the state of Florida, right? And you can see those billboards all over the place. We've got Morgan and Morgan and all the other attorneys that are just sitting there waiting to help you or help your client sue you. So you are taking a chance, putting all your money, your time, your energy, and effort into a business, and you're building it, but you're not protecting yourself. So liability insurance is the number one thing that you at least need to start starting off with your business. So that's typically the first thing that people ask me is, I'm going to start a business. What do I need? So that's my minimum. Depending on what you're doing, we can go into more details, but I get really, like I said earlier, I'm a curious person. So I ask a lot of questions. I'm one of those people where people are like, can you stop asking so many questions? But it really is for their benefit. So I want to know, are you renting space? Do you sell products? Do you have equipment that you might lose? We unfortunately live in Florida where we have hurricanes. If you have a space and it flooded and you lost everything, what would that look like? If you had to shut down the building and you couldn't have income, do you want to have protection for that? So it's just walking them through all of those questions and then presenting, this is my recommendations, here's why, and then allowing them to say yes or no, depending on what their needs are or their budget in their business.
Okay. All right. So liability having a liability policy and a liability insurance, that's kind of like the starter pack.
Yes.
Okay, amazing. I know I have liability insurance for coaches. Do you know, can you speak, and it's fine if you don't know the like direct answer to this, but a lot of people who listen to the show, they're in the coaching and consulting space or online services. And oftentimes it's like, well, I'm working online. I can work with people in Germany and Australia and all over the place. And sometimes I think there's a disconnect and people think like, well, insurance is for brick and mortars, or this is for people who have like, not a real business because we all have real businesses, but are there certain types of insurance that a service provider who's running an online business should be paying attention to? Obviously, the liability policy, liability protection, anything else that we should be considering?
Yeah. So for coaches in general, liability is super important because you're giving advice. And if your client is taking that advice and say they have a financial loss or they think you lied or something happened in that transaction and resulted in a loss for the client, well, they can look at you and say, well, you're liable. You're my coach. You told me what to do, even though they're the ones that took action. So the liability piece is super important. The other thing you might want to consider too is if you are active on social media, we've got a lot of people putting out positive information, but they really need to be careful on the negative information because there's this thing called defamation of character that you can be sued for. So say, for example, you're putting out, that this coach, did this awful thing and they're hurting your character. Well, you can also sue them for, defamation of your character, of saying bad things that may not be accurate. So there's different things that people can be sued for. If you're giving advice, especially in the coaching world, I highly recommend you at least have the liability, because if someone does come after you and you don't have that insurance, you could lose your business. Depending on how your business is titled, in your individual name, LLC, lots of different rules there, but they could come after your car or investment account, and you wouldn't want to have to lose other items because someone had a bad transaction with you as a coach. So the liability part is important. But if you are selling online products, then that's a whole other insurance that we'll want to get into as well, because if something happens with that client, their children chokes on a piece of, whatever it is that you sold to them, which I've seen happen quite often, then you're still liable for that. Even though you weren't there when it happened, you provided the product that caused the injury, then there's a different type of insurance for that as well.
Wow. Okay. So as I'm listening to you talk, I am thinking about, what's going through the mind of a business owner, not even if they like are just getting started and like decided yesterday to build a business, but even somebody who they might already be making like six figures, multiple six figures. This is really similar to, legal, because a lot of business owners want to avoid all the legal things that they need to put in place. And I'm sure they're avoiding the insurance things they need to put in place. And one of the biggest objections is, well, I can't afford that right now. I don't have the money for that. And there's obviously an expense to this, but can you bring us down to earth and let us know, like, if the only thing we're going to do is get the liability protection, how much are we looking at that's going to cost, like a coach or a consultant with an online business over the course of a calendar year?
Yeah, $50, $60 a month.
That's it, folks.
Yeah. So cut out 2 Starbucks, 3 Starbucks, pay for insurance.
Yeah. And okay, the other thing is a lot of coaches and consultants as well have in-person events, retreats, events, VIP days, even if it's just one client, small group events. Is there a particular insurance that covers hosting people? Not even I'm not even saying in your home. Some people do host clients in their home. I've done that before, but it might actually be at another establishment. It may be at a hotel. And oftentimes we think, well, the hotel is liable for that. So is there certain kind of insurance if we're hosting in-person events with our clients?
Yeah. And on the bigger venues like a hotel, typically they'll ask you to get insurance. So it's a day of event insurance, which helps to cover you as the event coordinator, putting everything together. And also one of the big questions we ask is, are you serving alcohol? Because that's an additional risk for an insurance company to cover. So it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Yeah. But anytime you're putting together events, even like at a restaurant or at a hall, if the owner of the building is not asking you for insurance, it doesn't mean you don't need it. And their insurance is not going to cover you and your event. You're going to be responsible for that. So you definitely want to have that type of insurance. And it's also relatively inexpensive. It could be a $500 policy if you're not serving alcohol and the event venue is a smaller venue. There's good lighting, good parking, that type of thing comes into play. But it could be several $1,000s depending on, the event size and if you are serving alcohol. But as an event person that's putting on the events, absolutely have an insurance policy for the day of the event.
Yeah. I think I was first introduced to needing to get insurance as a business owner when I hosted my first in-person retreat, which I believe it was either the first, it might have been the second year of my business. Like, yeah, somewhere in the second year of it. But we got a policy because we were hosting people in person. And my husband is in a networking group locally, and there's someone in that group. And that's why we got it the first time. So I'm glad I asked that. I'm just thinking as I'm hearing you talk, do you have any stories that you could tell? Like maybe pick one story of someone where they they did have insurance and it kind of like a business owner and it saved them because maybe a client was trying to accuse them of something and because they had the insurance in place, they were protected.
Yeah. So one example is I had a client who had multiple vehicles for a landscaping company. And when they add a vehicle to the landscaping company, I want to go over with them the value of the vehicle. Because sometimes when we, just type in a VIN number in our system and it populates a value, it's not always accurate, especially right after COVID when we were seeing the used car market. We were buying cars that were even higher than the value. So I have the opportunity to sit with the client and ask them how much they paid, and I will ask them for their invoice to show proof so that if we did have a claim, then I've got it in the file and I can give it to the insurance company. And so this happened to the client where they bought a vehicle and the price of the vehicle was higher than what my system was generating. So we adjusted the price in the system to cover that car based on what they paid. And lo and behold, they got it stolen and they had to file a claim. Now, had I not paid attention to that or knew that that's what the system does or knew to ask that question, they would have gotten a check for a much lower value, which would not have replaced the vehicle that was stolen in one of the vehicles that they use within their business. So that's probably a good example of making sure one, your agent is knowledgeable and asking the right questions, and two, you as the owner of the policy should also review it to make sure that it's accurate, even if you're just looking at it from a high level.
Yeah, with insurance, I think it's the same thing with accounting and with legal. Oftentimes, business owners, we think we're just trying to I think oftentimes like trying to get around paying X amount of money for a service. And so we're out making decisions in insurance, legal, and accounting. I think those are like the big three without this information that an expert like you would have. And I think that's a very grave mistake. I think that we end up in the long run saving so much money on the legal, the accounting, and on the insurance side if we would partner with someone who's an expert and go to that person and ask them questions. I mean, is that something that you do often? Like, I may not be your client, but I know you. And if I have questions, like, can people reach out to you and ask you questions and you give that advice? And then if they decide to go through you, they go through you.
Yeah, absolutely. And even examples of if you're renting space, and we had these flooding recently, right? My house flooded in St. Pete. I know a lot of commercial buildings flooded in the St. Pete area, but if you were renting that space and you didn't have flood insurance for your own contents, for example, I had a Pilates studio that had $100,000 worth of Pilates equipment. Well, when it floods, they can't quite use the equipment anymore, right? They have to replace it. But if your insurance agent didn't know to ask you that, then again, you didn't know that you had no contents coverage for flood because it's not a typical policy. But if we're asking you the right questions and saying, hey, if this happens, you're not covered. Are you okay with that? I have you sign a form and you decide you don't want it. That's fine. But at least I'm presenting it to you so that you, as the business owner, can figure out, do I need this insurance? Can I afford it in my budget? And what happens if I need it and I don't have it? Then I understand that I'm, coming out of pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Okay. The last thing I'm super interested in, So, once business owners are getting to a level where they start hiring team, there's two parts to my question. In the early days, six figures, multiple six figures, you're a hair over like 500,000, that whole range. People are usually hiring a virtual assistant or contractors. So they're either hiring people who have their own business, who come in and provide like a VA service, or they're hiring freelancers or contractors, and they're kind of piecemealing their team. And then once they get closer to a million plus, then that's when they really start transitioning and hiring full-time employees. So I know employee insurance exists. So can you talk to us for a few minutes about the importance of employee insurance? And do I need it if I'm hiring a contractor, a freelancer, or someone who represents their own business to be my VA and I'm signing their contract? Because that happens a lot. Even like marketing, if you're hiring a digital marketing agency, they're on your team, but you signed their contract, they represent their own business. So do we need insurance for both? Is it the same? Is it different? And I bet a lot of people know nothing about employee insurance.
Yes. So I'll try not to bore too much with the details. I'll give you a couple examples. Think of a general contractor. Typically, they will hire out, specialized stuff. So if you're remodeling your house and you hire a general contractor, they have their own insurance. But if they are subbing out to another company to do windows or the garage door, then each of those companies should have their own insurance in place. And the best practice for that general contractor is to say, let me see a copy so I can keep it on file. If there's, a lawsuit later on down the road, then I know your insurance will cover the work that you did. So that would be more of the 1099. If you are a company and you're hiring out a marketing agency, I would ask for a copy of their insurance. I want to have that in my file too, because if my client gets upset with something that they handled on the marketing piece and they come after me for a lawsuit, then I want to know you had insurance so that I'm protected and hopefully we can direct that lawsuit to your company. So that would be more of the 1099 contractor route. As far as an employee is concerned, yes, your employee can be covered under your own commercial insurance policy. There's also a separate policy if they are a W-2 employee, which is called workers' comp. So that's a different insurance. But I also want to talk about people who hire virtual assistants outside of the US. And so that's a big thing. If you go on to like Fiverr or one of those websites and you hire someone to help do your client's business, that's not covered under your insurance. And most likely in their country, they don't have insurance either. So be very careful about that. Now, if you go through a virtual assistant, a VA agency, typically they will have insurance in place. And again, I just ask for a copy. Can I see a copy of your insurance so I have it in my file? If you're going through an agency, especially one based in the US, even though they're hiring people outside of the country, they will have their own insurance in place, which will help protect you should they have a mistake with one of your clients. But if you're going out to one of the websites or finding your own VA, it's typically not covered under your insurance. So just be careful of the tasks that you're giving them and that they're not having any, confidential client information because you're not protecting your client or yourself in that instance.
Wow. This is so good. This is really good stuff, Angela. And I know you're in Florida. We have obviously not all of our listeners are from Florida. So can people reach out to you who are not Floridians?
Yeah, as far as getting insurance, no, we are regulated state by
Okay.
state. I'm only licensed in the state of Florida, but I'm part of a large network, as you probably are with the coaching field. If you have a question that's specifically outside of Florida, but in the US, then I can direct you and connect you with another agent that would be able to answer your question that's more specific to your state laws.
Okay, amazing. All right, Angela, give us a final plug for how important insurance is for entrepreneurs, and then tell us where we can connect with you further.
Yeah, so insurance should be part of your budget as soon as you launch. I love talking to new business owners and just teaching you about the minimum that I would recommend for insurance. And if you want to reach out to me, I am Empower Her Money on Instagram. That's also the name of my podcast where I love teaching about money and insurance all the time.
Amazing. Well, this has been enlightening and informative, and I'm going to use your word. I also think very empowering for people. I think when we don't have these ducks in a row, the insurance, the legal, the accounting, I keep saying that, but it's like, in the back of in your mind, you don't have it. legit, like it's not set up solid. And that is a disempowering feeling to not have things solid in the business. So you're protected on all of the, it's like a triangle. So I really enjoyed this conversation, Angela. You did a great job making it sound interesting. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.